I'm about to sit down now because you pretty much have all covered it with the various concepts that you brought up. As Tom said, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a technologist, and I'm not a techie. In fact, I was probably the worst, including my parents, at Donkey Kong and Pac-Man and those sorts of games. It's not my skill. My skill has been practicing law, particularly employment law, working in human relations or human resources, and offering advice to people experiencing workplace difficulties. I was probably 2 or 3 years past the average getting a cell phone. I fought it when in law school. I was told that we were going to be getting our mail by email rather than in paper folders. So this isn't something that I've always wanted to do. And actually, Mike in the back is the person who introduced me to this field altogether. And it's been a remarkable transformation for me, much to my wife's dismay. She is also a lawyer, and she can't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. So what am I doing? Basically, as I said, I started off as an attorney. And working on workplace issues for big law firms on the East Coast and the West Coast, and then moved in-house at Quest. I practiced at Quest for 2 years and then moved into their IT department doing global IT outsourcing, running all of those projects for them and all of their contracts and so forth. And in managing the interactions between our folks in the States, in various locations in the States, and our colleagues in India, you find very quickly, and many of you probably have had this experience, communication breaks down terribly. And it's the lack of interpersonal connection that someone mentioned earlier. You don't know the people very well. You sort of know them from a telephone call in the morning, maybe a telephone call in the evening. You don't know what their family lives are like. You don't run into them at the water cooler. You don't get a sense of who they are, and as a result, communication is not as effective as it could be, and projects are not as successful as they could be. So we found that very quickly, and I was sort of managing this new process of moving work from here to there and back and adjusting and managing that relationship. And it was just frustration after frustration because of this lack of interpersonal connection. Well, I talked to lots of people about ways to resolve that, got the consultants in, and typically the advice is for every 100 jobs, so to speak, that are moved, the company really needs to travel 20 people's worth of travel. So on 20 people's worth of travel, $10,000 worth of $10,000 each, you're talking about a lot of money. And you start to question the investment, particularly since you have a travel cost plus the reduction in efficiencies that you perceive you're getting, retraining, knowledge transfer, those sorts of things. So you start to question what it is you're doing. And on top of that, you've got the lack of interpersonal connection that you would have in any situation where somebody perceives that somebody else is taking a job of theirs. It's really a terribly dysfunctional situation. So I did that for 2 years. Beginning of last year, I decided to leave. I had had enough, and I thought I'd go back to practicing law. And I don't remember exactly when we met, but it was in connection with that sort of trying to find myself, figuring out what I wanted to do. And Mike told me about Second Life. I had heard of Second Life. I had never been in Second Life. Well, I decided to download the client, right? takes the average guy with an average computer, PC, about a half hour, I guess, to download the client. And even then, it's a little rocky. You've got to be committed to it, because if you're not committed to it, you're likely to give up. Second Life, for those of you who don't know it, is a virtual world. And it's a 3D attempt at a virtual environment consisting of islands that you can purchase, where you as an avatar that is a physical representation of you can interact with others in a multi-user environment. How many of you have been inside, have used Second Life? A little less than half. How many of you have used any sort of virtual world with avatar representations of people other than Second Life? Okay. So you're all sort of familiar with the concept, more or less. But let's start out at the beginning. You sign up. You choose your physical representation called an avatar. The avatar resembles a person, can resemble a male, can resemble a female, can resemble an animal if you choose to be an animal, however you want to represent yourself. Once you enter into the environment, in most virtual environments, there's some modest period of orientation where you learn how to maneuver yourself through the environment. What I found immediately with the background that I had was that the people I was interacting with in this environment, even though they were physically distant from me, obviously, felt like they were right next to me. That is, that I was interacting with somebody in person, even though they were physically distant from me. So when I would come across an avatar, I would make the sort of typical faux pas of asking them where in the real world they were, because I wanted to know that answer. And there'd be Canadas, there'd be UKs, there would be Germanys. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get off a German-speaking island, and I couldn't. Until you're in this spot and everybody's talking German, and you're trying to, but you learn how to do that. But the point is that you feel this sense of presence. That is, the person next to you, the avatar next to you, feels like you're with them even though they're far apart. So immediately I thought to myself, wow, what if we could replicate this sense of presence in the working environment that I just came from? So here I am, sitting in Denver, working with people in India every day. What if I could capture that sense of presence and use it with respect to those colleagues? I started to think about that, and whether or not that was a viable business to get into. Well, in order to satisfy myself that the feeling that I was feeling, that feeling of presence, it may sound strange to some of you that you could sit at a laptop or a computer and be sort of a cartoonish character and feel like you're spending time with another person even though you're just looking at another cartoonish character. But it's true. And what I did was I interviewed a number of neuroscientists in order to establish for myself that there was a legitimate reason for my feeling this way. Because it's a bizarre feeling at first. You sort of lose yourself in the plot, almost like when you read a book. You're reading this book and you're focused on the book, and your wife or your husband or whomever says, hey, hey, hey. And that's the kind of feeling you get. It's this immersed feeling of presence inside this environment. So I interviewed these neuroscientists, including a gentleman right here in Boulder. And I said, so this is the feeling I'm getting. And he says, well, yeah, right, that's right. It's called presence, I learned this. And it's because there are theories, right? I guess there are theories for everything. And if there are any neuroscientists here, you can help me out. But the concept is that you're basically suspending disbelief as you're caught up in this immersive environment. And it happens it happens to a lesser extent with text, to a greater extent in 3D environments where you can see another physicality, and that personality is coming through another physicality as you're standing there, particularly since you're sharing the environment with them. You can interact with the same objects. You're looking at the same things from different vantage points, just as you would in real life. So that feeling is a real feeling. So I established that premise. And with that premise, I felt, well, there's a viable business here because it's a real feeling that I'm getting. And it can be replicated in others. And I was convinced, after having spent hours upon hours and days upon days in Second Life learning about it, that if I could show people what I'd experienced, that I could basically change the way a lot of work in business is being done. Because I can do things like reducing air travel, reducing fuel consumption, reducing commuting, reducing the disruption that people have in their lives because they're always moving all over the place, reducing cultural barriers, because if you can spend time with people, more often than not, you tend to get over those things more quickly. So I thought that if I could just show people, I could really make a huge difference. By the way, questions are any time. If please ask. So I did my research, I did my reading, and I launched this business, and I started talking to companies about how they might be able to use these technologies. And frankly, people look at you like you're nuts. And I don't really blame them because, like I say, I was the worst at Donkey Kong, right? So I'm not one of these guys. I don't have an iPhone, right? I'm not one of these guys who has the latest technologies at my fingertips. I just knew that this game-like environment felt really real to me. The press thus far on virtual worlds has been very mixed. If you spend time reading the media, looking at the media on virtual worlds, what you're going to take away is a lot of really, really strange-looking avatars who are having a lot of sex, and probably, you know, guys and women sitting in their basements looking at this all day. Well, there's some of that, but the message that I wanted to get out was this message of being together with people despite distance. That's the message. So what have we done? We've launched a business and social network to bring leaders and users and people who are interested in the industry together to talk about this kind of stuff. We've launched a publishing division to publish books and reports and articles on it, and we're working on about 10 books now, and on different subjects. For example, one is called The Virtual Corporation. A really cool thing in my mind. And it's basically a discussion by experts in the various traditional corporate fields and how virtual worlds will impact their traditional functions. Think about it. I've pointed out a couple of examples in the HR space. But you can imagine all of the different applications for virtual environments in the future, from operations, training, education, learning. A lot of that stuff is happening already, to data visualization. So think about a guy like me who got a C in math, in calculus, the second time I took it, okay? And you'll see why data visualization can be kind of neat. If I can get beyond the spreadsheet and be able to see an image of the data that is available to me as an executive, I can make changes in my organization based on a shape instead of a list of numbers. That's pretty amazing in my mind. Training is obvious, I think more obvious. A lot of companies now are using virtual worlds, including but not limited to Second Life, for training, orienting people to jobs, emergency training, crisis training, that sort of thing. The military has been using virtual environments for a long time to teach people, or to show people the various things they might need to do during wartime without actually, starting a war. So the military has been engaged in this for quite a long time. The opportunities to bring groups of people together in an environment without travel, to see things in a 3D way without having to look at numbers. These are all different ways of looking at virtual worlds and why they're going to change the way, yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the dollars going in and out of Second Life?
Oh, yeah, sure. So let me tell you a little bit about Second Life. So Second Life is a virtual world consisting of many hundreds, thousands of different islands that people have purchased. On those islands, people can create their own buildings, content of any kind. People sell shirts they create, pants they create, other things they create. Basically, anything you want to buy in Second Life for your avatar, you can purchase in Second Life, and someone's created it for you. What the currency in Second Life has been established by Linden Lab, which is the company that owns Second Life, and it's called the Linden Dollar. The Linden Dollar is actually a convertible currency. So you can purchase Linden Dollars with US dollars, and if you don't want your Linden Dollars, you can then cash them out for US dollars. The conversion rate is roughly 270 to 1, I think, the last time I checked. And
Which way?
$1. You know what? Last time I checked, it could be anything now, right? But it was $1 US to 270 lindens. And it's got its own financial system. A couple months ago, maybe 6 months ago, there was sort of a scandal around banking inside of Second Life. Believe it or not, and this is shocking to me, but it's a testament to the nature of the medium, right? When people will when people will get married, okay, in a virtual environment, when they move in with a spouse in Second Life, when they put money in a bank in Second Life, an unregulated made-up bank, there's something going on, and it's happening on a massive scale. It's not just a couple of oddballs. It's like concurrent users in Second Life now at any given time, roughly 50,000, a little bit less. That's a significant number of people engaged in this community. Number of users, registered users, over time, 11 million, something like that. That's a lot of people. Now, some of those people have dropped off after the first time because they logged in, they didn't get it, and they went away. That's a problem, retention. But the fact that people are getting involved in very rich relationships isn't so much about the quote-unquote game of Second Life. It's about the medium, that avatars can connect with avatars. It seems sort of strange. But the premise is I think, proven time and time again, that people feel like they're together even though they're really not. So the association has started, and we're trying to get out a message concerning the value of virtual worlds for things other than marketing, by the way. I'm sorry to jump around a little bit, but there are a lot of points that have come out in the media, particularly around marketing. Lots of companies have left Second Life recently. Lots are coming in, but not as publicly as they once did. But they've left because of marketing failures in Second Life. Other virtual worlds, however, are booming in terms of marketing. Think about the kids' environments. These are the most these are the booming virtual worlds in existence right now. They're the kids' worlds. Barbie girls, Webkins, Club Penguin. There are many, many, many of them. And they're making tons of money off of, in some cases, subscriptions, children, parents maybe, buying subscriptions to these different things, but also product placement. What's that? Isabel, coming soon. So the product placement. Think of a virtual world as a movie, as a long, long, long movie with thousands of different ways to move. And think about it. Think about it as a city. And the way you can place products in a city, that's happening in kids' worlds right now.
13 million total.
In Second Life. Registered users, okay. So 13 million, a significant percentage drop off after the first time, and that's an issue for them. But a lot of money being made in kids' worlds. In fact, Habbo Hotel, which is one of the largest worlds for what they call, I guess, tweens, purports to have 90 million registered users. 90 million. I don't see how that's possible, but that's the number they put out. But the kids' worlds and the teens' worlds are booming right now. Nickelodeon comes out with a new virtual world, seems like every day. MTV has virtual worlds now. All of these are branded custom worlds for these different existing. Barbie. I was at a conference. I spoke at a conference in New York a couple weeks ago, and one of the keynote speakers was from Barbie Girls. And they've built a thriving community, basically an extension of the Barbie brand. The theory is that 12-year-olds aren't necessarily going to buy the doll, but they might spend time in the environment dressing each other up, putting hair on the avatars, those sorts of things, and they're engaged in these things. Now, I'm not a huge proponent of that. I have 2 children, and I don't particularly want them spending time in that environment, but the point is that kids are creating relationships with other kids across distance. And that can be pretty transformational in a way that we haven't experienced before. Let's see what else I can show you. So I give a talk called When Pigs Fly, and pigs do fly in virtual worlds, and in virtual worlds, a lot of what you mentioned earlier already exist. From shopping to all sorts of transactions. These things will increase in prominence over the next couple of years. I talk about games. I tell people that I'm not into games. I don't enjoy them. But what this is a gaming technology connected with a chat room and in a multi-user environment, so it's a 2-player game. It's a many player game, and you can all sort of see each other and interact with each other. And the virtual worlds that are the product of the games and the chat rooms are numerous. At this point, we just put out a book last week called The Blue Book Consumer Guide to Virtual Worlds, and there are about 250 listed, and those are virtual worlds from adults to virtual worlds that are designed for workplaces, to enterprises, to kids, all sorts of environments, platforms designed particularly for military and government use. But these are virtual environments that are making a lot of money and will continue to make a significant amount of money, I think, for the foreseeable future. A game-like immersion and social media functionality without game-like goals. So the environment is there. Sometimes it's user-generated, that is, you can create your own content. Sometimes it's already there for you, but there is no script. You just sort of do what you want to do there. There is no goal. There aren't quests that you go on. There aren't battles, unless you want to have a battle, I suppose. but they're environments that are designed primarily for immersion. The sense of presence with others at the same time and place. Yeah.
What about World of Warcraft? Would you consider that a virtual?
You know what? A lot of people do. A lot of people don't. It all depends on the definition that you use. I mean, there is no sort of actual definition of what a virtual world is. There are the virtual world sort of industry right now is sort of defining itself. To what extent do games play a role, and how does that work? Clearly, the games that have a narrative in them are very different than some of the other sort of environments that are online workplaces where you there is no narrative, there is no game, there are no goals, there are no quests. You just work in them. You see your colleague, you interact with your colleague, you look at a desk together and whatever's on the desk together, you watch videos with them in the same space, you communicate with them. So, but they share many of the same elements, and they and the beauty of it is they're both immersive, and they're both multiplayer. Go ahead.
If I might assert that it's actually
Sure.
restricted to a certain purpose.
Yep.
And that purpose is a game.
And it's a game. There's a narrative to the experience.
So Second Life has a lot of games in it. Paintball, for example.
There are games in it.
But it's not restricted to.
That's right. A year and a half ago, IBM put out a really interesting report on the value of games like World of Warcraft in the workplace. And if you haven't seen that, it's really quite interesting. And the discussion there really had to do with that when you're engaged with other people and you're relying on each other to fulfill the various tasks in the game, in the experience, there's a level of accountability, there's leadership, there are all these different qualities that sort of come to the fore when you're in this environment that are readily applicable to the workplace. And that before long, perhaps not in the next 5 years, but maybe in the next 10 years, certain people who have reached a relatively high level of achievement inside these games may be promoting themselves as having done so, because it will say to others that they have certain skills, talents, and so forth. It's interesting, but it's certainly the numbers in World of Warcraft. I don't know the exact numbers, but we're talking in the many millions of people. How many? 9 million people engaged in this game. The only virtual world that I'm aware of that has currency convertible to real life currency is Second Life. But many other worlds have currency, credits, different things of that nature that are used to purchase goods or services inside of the virtual environment. So many of them have their own sort of economies. There's a huge group of developers, artisans really, who are associated with a virtual world called IMVU in the association. And they recently had a dispute with the owner of IMVU about the ownership of user-created content. And so there have been a number of threads in the network about, it almost struck me, it almost seemed like a labor dispute. The kinds of conversations you would have when you were upset with management about the treatment of employees. These developers in this virtual world were upset that the owners of this IMVU platform had created these very stringent requirements around user-created content, weren't protecting the content as well as they could have, opening up the various developers to theft and those sorts of things, and copying and that. But people are very invested in those economies. A lot of people make a lot of money on those economies. In fact, another book that I'm working on is a set of anecdotes by people who are Second Life success stories, right? So these are people who entered Second Life and found that they had a particular skill, designing clothing or goods or services or something, and then actually turned that into a real career and started making money by selling these things in Second Life. And I think those are pretty compelling stories, not only because they're success stories, but because to the extent virtual environments develop that way, this can be a guidebook in some sense for other people who want to be financially successful developing things in a virtual environment. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? So that's another thing we're developing. A pretty interesting subject, I think. So for those of you who aren't really familiar, this is my avatar. You can choose to make your avatar look however you want your avatar to look. I chose this because if I bring somebody in from a company, I don't want them to be shocked by, a bunny rabbit. So I choose something that looks sort of normal, okay? The swans in the background are swans that are animated in my pond, and I've created this to create different moods in the simulated environment. So my VR workplace sim has offices, it has conference rooms, it has meeting spaces, it has an amphitheater. It also has an amusement park with a Ferris wheel because I can have it. And because when people come around, I want to show it to them. It also has underneath that pond, there's a conference room with fish swimming by. Why? Why not? If I can have a meeting in an immersive environment and I feel like I'm connecting to people there, why not have it in an environment where you promote discussion by sort of the oddness of the surroundings? I've always felt that, I guess I feel now that we're constrained by the walls and the ceiling, and that's great, but in a virtual environment, you can do whatever you want, so why not? I was at this conference a month ago, and I was talking to somebody who's a pretty well-known blogger in Second Life and virtual worlds, and she was telling me about a woman who had 4 children and really was strapped. A difficult situation. This is someone she knew personally. Started escaping a Second Life. And she found that she really enjoyed making clothing in Second Life. So she opened up a shop and she started selling her clothing. Well, one shop became 2, became 4, and she started making a living. Well, now she created a business card in real life, describing herself as the CEO of her own clothing company, okay? And she's handing cards out to people and talking about, she's got 4 shops now, talking about pricing models and marketing and all the other things that the CEO of a small clothing company would talk about. That I don't think is the direct response, but the fact remains that spending time in a virtual environment can transform real life, just as real life informs your behavior in the virtual environment. And that's pretty powerful because most kids, when I went to school, you spent a lot of time reading a book. And when I was in business school, we spent a lot of time reading books and reading about various principles and so forth. But what if you could really simulate those things in a way that would then inform your real life? Seems to me, for a lot of people, that would be far more effective than reading a book, or maybe in tandem with reading a book. But these things are happening. There are stories like this everywhere. Let's see here. So that's my avatar over the pond. That's my avatar in the conference area. I say this is my avatar if I wasn't speaking, I would say that's me in front of the, right? But I'm being very careful so you don't think I'm crazy. That's my avatar. Okay?
Didn't work.
Some of this I've alluded to earlier. The 20th century technology hangover, right? So this is what I sort of use to describe the situation where we have airplanes, we have computers and sophisticated networks and so forth. So we're able to work with people in India very easily, but there's a hangover associated with it, and that is that that we're not connected terribly well. We're interpersonally deficient in a sense, and the products suffer. So there's the technology, and then there's the hangover. And what I try to tell people is that virtual worlds can be an effective hangover remedy, along with other things, good management, all of the other typical things we would use. But virtual worlds can help. The concept of Main Street, right? You could walk down the street, you knew your neighbor. I don't know whether this world ever existed, but I've heard about it. And you knew the banker, you knew the... Well, in a global environment, it's very difficult to do those things. But if we're able to create virtual environments that replicate that kind of interaction, to what extent can we replicate whatever camaraderie, interpersonal connection we had in an old-time Main Street? It's something that people are thinking quite a lot about. Globally distributed workforces, communities residing within virtual environments. The global hallway and the water cooler chat. This is one of my favorites, and it was mentioned just before. People who work in companies, in large companies, know, at least I think it's true, that work typically doesn't get done in 3-hour meetings. Typically, what happens is you lose track of what the heck's going on, and at least I do. And then at the end, you really don't know what, you haven't gotten marching orders, you don't know what the tasks are. It's just a waste of time. But work does get done when you run into somebody in the hallway. When you run into somebody in the hallway, you remember, you see their face, you say, oh, you know what, I meant to ask you something. Or, could you look at something for me? Or, you walk by their office and you say, and you stop, and you say, wait a second, okay? That's when work gets done. Those instantaneous, serendipitous interactions that we have at work. We don't have those globally. We can't. Perhaps until now. So you have a virtual environment on your screen. So you run into somebody in the hallway. How do you do it in a virtual environment? You take a virtual environment, you put the virtual environment in the corner of the screen. You sit anywhere in the world. You have it on your screen, you have the Wi-Fi up, and you're an avatar, and everybody else in your office is an avatar, and you're all sitting in the same atrium, okay, virtually. And you have the sound on, and you can hear what other people are up to. And they can yell across the atrium and say, hey, Dave, I got to ask you a question. Or you can say every hour, get up and walk around. And you can run into Dave, and you can say, hey, Dave, I had a question. And time zones still exist, and I don't want people to think that we're going to overcome time zones, but we can have more effective overlaps, okay? And we can work wherever we want and have that degree of freedom, and we can be more connected despite our distance. That's the global hallway. Serendipity is the same concept. Sausalito, Singapore, and back. So I'm in my virtual environment, and I'm talking to a guy, an avatar next to me, and he's at his desk in Edmonton, Alberta. And we're talking. And I'm showing him something that's being built by an avatar who's sitting at her desk in Shanghai. She's right there. Yeah, she's right there. But she's in Shanghai. Yeah. Okay. Multi-user environment, you're sort of realizing that here you are together in the same environment, and you can work more effectively when you're with people, and you can recreate that in the virtual environment. How do you build this? So the next iteration of things may not be as far as Second Life. So let me describe that. Second Life is what's called a walled garden. Now, a walled garden means that it is a heavy client, a big download that sort of exists off the web, meaning you don't put in a web address to get to your spot. It's not in your browser, it's something else. Okay? But what if, instead of a walled garden that you'd have to download, what if you could go to a website, www.whatever.com, and instead of being at a website, you were at a web place. So instead of looking at a list of links and reading text, you were in a room. You were looking at other people. And you could shop with them and interact with them, communicate with them, work with them, just as you would in real life, but on a web page. Now imagine if all the 2D content out there was now tied into these 3D web places so that you could walk down the hallway, and if you wanted to read CNN, you could tap on the wall and your regular CNN page could come up. That's how you get to this. I think how you get to this, and what I'm working on for the association, is a virtual headquarters in using this technology. Because I believe that this technology, because it's highly accessible, web page. If I ask you to go to a web page, you'll go to a web page. If I ask you to download a 30-minute downloadable client, you're not going to do it. So here's the segue. Here's the intermediate step. The intermediate step is there are a handful of companies that design 3D immersive web pages. I am developing a virtual environment using this technology for the association because I feel like I can walk into any executive's office and get that person to click on a link. Once that person sees immersion on the web, I believe that that person will be sold. It's very hard to get them to Second Life, and others like it. So consider a series of web places. So think about the DMV. Today, you go to the DMV website, you probably have a couple of links, you probably have links to pages, and you try to figure out where to go. Well, what if instead, and the DMV may be a bad example, that might be your preferred approach, but imagine instead you went to the site and there was a receptionist standing there. And the receptionist said, hey, can I help you? Oh, you need to figure out how to get your renewal. Click on this picture on the wall, and you'll get the information. Or what if you were in Target, and you wanted to go to Target, and you wanted to find a particular thing, and you didn't want to go to a 2D catalog, you wanted to talk to somebody. Say, how do I, where is such and such? And they could direct you. That's the next iteration of the web. That is an interactive, multi-user, 3D set of web places rather than set of websites. And that's what I believe the next step is. So in the workplace example, think of the difference between the internet and the intranet. I can take those web pages and I can put them on your intranet, and your employees can interact on that website in that scene without the hardware and software and bandwidth requirements of one of those walled gardens. Very easy to create then a set of immersive spaces on the web that virtually any website you can imagine CNN, that's news, right? You're reading news? Well, you can imagine a lounge where readers of CNN could sit around and talk. You can imagine polling. You can imagine all sorts of interactions inside the web. You can imagine all sorts of social networks where instead of just typing, You could meet people. Think of LinkedIn. A lot of people, mostly everybody here must be involved with LinkedIn to some extent, right? So there's a question and answer portion on LinkedIn. So imagine you send a question and you ask a question about Second Life. And I respond to you. And I say, well, why don't we talk, okay? And you click a link, and then all of a sudden we're communicating. Some of you think this is a little bit far out, but we're getting close. What are the barriers? The barriers are, to some extent, hardware, to some extent, software. Mostly, in my opinion, the lack of photorealistic avatars. I think avatars are still a little bit strange looking for some people. But we're getting there. Emotional expressions on avatars' faces, we're getting there. And with cameras, right? So the camera takes a look at you and mimics on the avatar. Also the laptop. I think the laptop and the desktop are actually our biggest enemies in a sense, because they're word processing tools. It seems weird to sit at a typewriter and look at a screen at avatars. But if you put on a pair of glasses that are being developed up in Washington State for the military, light plastic glasses, and you're in the environment instead of looking at the environment, I think a lot of doubts will be eliminated, because we'll be in it as opposed to just looking at it on a screen. 3D Explorer is the platform that I'm using to develop this environment, and I do building on it, and I do building on a bunch of other platforms. But it's really promising because it's on the web. It's 3D artifacts, it's avatars, it's all this kind of stuff on the web. Typical normal paradigm that we're all used to. But when you click on the link, you're not just looking at a page, you're looking at a place. And that can be pretty interesting, yes.
How do business documents play into this arena? Because, for example, you were looking at a development plan for a product or presentation or something.
You know, so there are a couple of answers, I guess. So if you're talking about, how you would do it, I think that we need to be careful that we don't use technology in sort of a gratuitous way, right, in an unnecessary way. We need to make sure that it adds value. So if we're looking at the same document and we're far apart and we're looking at the same document, to me, I'm not sure whether I need that document to sit inside an immersive environment, because we're going to be talking about the document as it sits on our screens anyway. We're going to be seeing the same thing. We're focused on the document. However, Second Life and other virtual worlds, a lot of virtual worlds will allow you to link to a document that might be on your desktop so that you can see it in the virtual environment. And you would use that, say, if you just wanted people to see it as opposed to have it. So you don't want to email it to them, you just want them to see it inside the environment. And you can do that too. You can do PowerPoint, you can do all those kinds of things inside of virtual environments. The other issue to consider, however, is security. So in Second Life and a lot of other virtual worlds, those areas are public, so you don't necessarily want to share corporate information through those environments. That's why I talked about the distinction between the internet and the intranet. Ideally, you want these things on the intranet, and right now, Second Life won't go there. Imagine, and I spoke to of all people, I spoke to the ABA last week. The American Bar Association Technology in the Practice and Workplace Committee is actually thinking about this, okay? Which was amazing to me, because when I work with employment lawyers, they weren't anywhere near this, which is great. But the issue that I raised was, let's say you have a virtual corporation because you want the best and brightest in the world working together as if in person in a virtual environment. You don't want to have them move anywhere. You want them to work together in a virtual space. And let's say you have 50 people. And let's say they live and work inside of 50 different countries. Well, you've just created a massively global workforce and an enormous burden for your legal staff, not to mention, HR, benefits, pensions, taxes. I mean, imagine it. Now, what about cross-jurisdictional disputes? The guy sitting next to you in a virtual environment. Now, we've got our goggles on, so the person really feels like they're next to you. The person sitting next to you is in Pakistan. I'm in the United States. How much do we pay that guy? How much do they pay me? And these are issues that are going to come up. There's no question about it. So those issues haven't yet been grappled with. I will tell you one thing that's kind of interesting, maybe peculiar to Second Life, is this concept of free labor. So in Second Life, it's not atypical for you to build something, say a building, someone comes by and says, hey, I'd like to help you build. Everyone likes to build in Second Life. And you say, sure, help me build. This is my building. I put a porch on it. And they do it. And you agree that you're going to pay them 100 lindens an hour. 100 lindens is less than 50 cents an hour. Okay? This is happening all the time by big name companies, Fortune 500 companies. And I was in an HR magazine article a couple months ago. And I said to because this guy at a consulting company was boasting how he got a greeter, person to stand at the sim and greet people as they landed. As they arrived, you greet, say, hey, how you doing, welcome. He's paying them 50 cents an hour. So I said to the reporter, I said, this guy's got to be out of his mind. But again, because he's violating wage laws, probably, depending on the jurisdiction that person is sitting in, we only think that the Second Life matters because it makes us feel like it matters, okay? It's a tool. Keep telling people, it's a tool. You're sitting at your computer, right? In the old days, no one would have had any doubt that if you were talking on your phone in Colorado, right, that you would be subject to the wage laws of Colorado. You wouldn't be subject to the wage laws of the guy whose phone, who you were talking to on the phone, right? Or the phone companies. You're subject to the laws of Colorado. Yeah. So this is going to happen in a big way. And I ticked somebody off last week because she wrote me a note, and she said, can you believe that these guys are threatening to sue my friend for $70,000 in wages, even though they agreed, they volunteered to help him build his facility. Since when can we do volunteer work in this country? We can't. Very limited circumstances. I'm not giving legal advice. Very limited circumstances, okay? But you can't volunteer to do work. You get paid for work. They were working for him. So I ticked her off because because she was upset about her friend. It's, well, I personally wish that, the first case where this happens is to a big company, not to a little guy. But the odds are it's going to happen to a little guy because there are more of them. Augmented reality, that's the last thing I wanted to point out. In 10 years, all the things I believe, all the things that you mentioned were going to happen, I think will have happened within 2 years, okay? Within 10 years, this is what I want to do. Within 10 years, I want to be able to meet for coffee on 17th in California and Denver with a friend of mine who lives in Copenhagen, Denmark, without her having to leave her home in Denmark. Okay? That's where we'll be in 10 years. So in 10 years, I'll be able to sit at my desk in Denver, and my employee in India will be able to sit in my office for a meeting, virtually, without spending any fuel, travel, nothing. They'll be able to pull up a chair, and in 10 years, we'll be able to shake hands, and we'll both feel it. Okay? That's 10 years, in my mind, haptics exist. We have all this stuff. We just have to put it together. So you've got a cell phone, you've got GPS, you've got browser on your eyes, right? You've got Google Maps. Think about Google Maps. Google is doing a lot of things that we don't realize they're doing, right? Google Maps, GPS, search functionality, all that stuff mixed up together equals augmented reality. There's no question in my mind. Okay? So that's in 10 years. And there are companies developing that right now.